So I'm so excited to introduce to you a new series that we're going to be starting with this cute little elephant, and we're calling it the Tummy Time Buddy Stuffies. Testers have been loving them so far, so I'm really hoping that you guys enjoy them as well. So we started with a video tutorial on this guy so we can make sure that you guys all understand the process. Plus this guy has a fun 3D trunk, so that adds an extra element to the design as well. So as you can see, we've got a cute little head attached to a laying belly Stuffie, so that's why we called him the Tummy Time Buddy. And the head is attached without the use of doll joints or hand sewing it on, which is awesome. So you just have a small turning hole that you need to turn on this guy. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this cutie made. For your materials, you're going to need something for your elephant tail tuft. I'm using yarn, and I just picked out a few colors that matched my inner ear fabric. I just usually take a string of them and then just wrap it around my hand. I tend to use too much, that's probably way too much. And then I wrap a tail around and then just slide the loop through that hole and pull tight, and that sort of secures it onto the tail or onto each other for tacking it down, and you can cut those tail ends. You need an inner fabric. I'm doing the 5x7 design, so I always cut my fabrics 2 inches larger than my hoop to give myself some wiggle room. So for the 5x7, I cut my fabric 7 by 9 inches. And then you're going to have the backing for your ear. I also have some felt that I'm going to use under my ear so that it has some structure so the ear doesn't flop down on the side of my Stuffie. Water soluble stabilizer topper, so the clear type. If you're using anything with a pile, which I am. So then you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric for your body and 2 pieces of fabric for your head. So I have cut these opposite, so you want to consider stretch. So this fabric isn't super stretchy, but it has stretch this way and very little stretch this way. So if this is my body fabric, if I can stretch from the front to the back, it's going to make a longer, skinnier Stuffie. If you have your stretch going this way, like these pieces, your Stuffie is going to be fatter and shorter. So I chose to do my body longer and skinnier. The head is more important because it's kind of an oval shape. It's better if you have the stretch going up and down, or you're going to get a very long and skinny head. And if your stretch is going up and down, you'll get a more plump, round head. So I've gone ahead and loaded hoop 1, which is your ears, into my machine, and you're going to go ahead and stitch your step 1 on stabilizer. So step 1 goes on your stabilizer, and then I'm going to lay that felt I mentioned down. This is an optional step, but I really think it looks nicer with a stiffer ear. And then I'm going to lay my inner ear fabric, and it's going to stitch 2 folding guidelines that will show you how to fold your ear properly. So you want to use a contrasting color for this. It won't be seen in your final design. So our fold guide lines are stitched, and then you're going to take your ear backing fabric and you're going to lay it right side down over your hoop, and we're going to run the final outline around the ears. So the ear hoop is complete. There is a stop star at the end just to make sure your hoop doesn't recenter. It's not a huge big deal for this hoop, but it's just habit. And we're going to take this out of the hoop, cut around our ears. We're going to put some vertical slits in our seams so you get a nice smooth turn on your ears, and turn them right side out, and then I'll show you how to fold them. So we've got our ears all cut out and turned. I use a dowel inserted in to really pop that out and get a nice smooth circle ear, especially with that felt in there. It is stiff. So the folding guide, you're going to fold right where the direction changes so that you get a nice three-dimensional ear. You can either clip that, or I prefer to sew it on my sewing machine with a zigzag stitch to secure the woven, or you can pin it, or you can hand sew it. So really any of those will work to keep that in place. So the first hoop is done, and we're moving on to the second hoop. The second hoop is the 3D trunk part of the elephant's face and the tail. So we go ahead and stitch our step 1 on stabilizer to show us where to lay our fabrics. Step 1 is stitch on our stabilizer, and we're going to be doing our tail first. I am just taking some scrap that I've cut off the ears to save, but you can cut a new piece of fabric if you like. And I'm just going to lay that fabric over the tail placement and make sure it's completely covered, and that's going to tack that fabric down in step 2. So we stitch step 2, and then step 3 is just a placement to show you where to put your tail tuft. So you're going to lay your tail tuft down. I probably should take some of that yarn out, it's pretty tight. And I would suggest using a scrap, I usually have them hanging around all over my room, of water-soluble stabilizer over this step. So I'm going to take a bit of that yarn out, it's too much, and you don't want to stitch on top of that little knot that you tied. You want to stitch just inside of it to tack down that yarn. So I've gone ahead and tacked that down. I did stop the machine there to reposition my yarn. You can tape or pin down your water soluble to make it easier, but just to your preference. So I'm going to rip off that water soluble. I'm going to take that knot bolt out, and it does do a zigzag stitch to really secure your yarn there. And so what you're going to want to make sure is done is that your yarn is in between the original tack down of the tail, and then we're going to add another scrap from our ears right side down over top of our tail, and it will stitch the final outline. So the tail is done. That's probably too long of yarn, but I always like to make it longer than I need it, and then I can trim it once I'm done and get the look that I want. Now we're ready to do the 3D trunk. So you're going to take one of your face fabrics, which with the stretch going up and down, and lay it right side up over your trunk placement. Same thing with your other one, but you're laying it right side down. And we're going to go ahead and it will stitch the outline of your 3D trunk over on this side. You want to make sure you have enough excess to cover that placement box there. So we've completed the trunk final outline. We've got our tail fabric underneath, and we're going to go ahead and unhoop that. We're going to cut just around our trunk final outline, and you really want to make sure to snip into your seams with vertical stitches to get a good clean turn out of that. And the tail we're also going to cut around and turn right side out. So hoop 3 is loaded, which is going to be our body hoop. The step 1 is done on the stabilizer to show you where to place your fabrics. So step 1 has been stitched on stabilizer. You're going to go ahead and lay your fabric right side up over the placement. Again, with the stretch, if it's going this way, your stuffie is going to be a longer, skinnier stuffie, and if you have your stretch going this way, you're going to make a shorter, plumper stuffie. So it's stitched around our body. It's also giving you center markers so that you can center your head fabric. The head is a little smaller than the hoop, so if you're cutting it 2 inches bigger than your fabric, than your hoop size, sorry, it will give you lots of leeway. But what you want to do is take your fabric and lay it right side down. So I'm going to approximately just fold it in half and mark the center and then lay it out. There's also 2 little markers here on the side of your feet that show you how far down to lay your fabric so you get your head in the right position. So this fabric is the back of our head hoop. So this is going to be on the back. You want it laid right side down. So our fur fabric is down, and you want the stretch going up and down to make a nice plump head. So you're going to lay that down, and it's going to stitch a circle, which is going to attach your back of your head to your body hooping. So it's stitched that circle as well as a zigzag stitch to really secure that in, and you're going to want to trim away the fabric on the inside. My favorite are my double angled, but you can use your favorite pair of scissors to just cut that out without cutting any of the stitching that's tacking it down. So the hole doesn't have to be perfect. You will not see that inside. That's just going to be how we stuff our head and turn our head through our body. So the next step is going to be our placement for our tail. So we're going to have to fold that fabric back, and it's going to stitch a placement here so we can add our tail. So I've turned my tail right side out. You can use a dowel or hemostats as a tool to help you with that if you find it hard on the fingers. And I had a little escapee yarn, and I just trimmed that off, and I can probably take tweezers and pull just the excess out of there when I'm done. So the placement has stitched in between the hind legs. So if you want your tail to look like that, you're going to lay it down and then flip it over, and we're going to tack it down with the excess inside our outline. So our tail is tacked down. There's then a moving marker that will move it over to the side so it doesn't cross across your tail and potentially catch. So again, that's step 6. You can stitch if you want to, or you can just manually proceed it to your next step. Now the next 3 steps are your body final outline. So we have to make sure that we're not catching this fabric in the final outline. So the outline starts on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and move all my fabric. It's going to stitch from here to the center. So I'm going to make sure that this fabric is out of the way, and you can pin or tape that out of the way. I'm going to lay my backing right side down over the hoop, and we're going to stitch the first section up to the center outline, and then we will reposition. Phew, that was close. That was very close to the edge of my fabric there. So it stitched the first section of the final outline. So I'm just going to move that backing away for now. So we're going to be stitching the second half of the final outline. So it'll go from the middle here down around to the back. So I'm just going to tuck all that fabric out of the way so that I can do the final outline to the center middle. So our last section of the hoop is going to be around the back end. So all I'm going to do is take all this fabric and shove it inside the part that I've already stitched. So you're going to make sure that your tail is still on the inside and hasn't flopped out, and that none of your yarn is around your final outline. So we're going to flip that back and stitch the remaining around. So we've finished that final outline there. It leaves a turning hole and there's a stop star at the end so it doesn't go into all that bulk that's in the center and make an awful cranking noise, which does not feel nice. So we're going to take that out of the hoop and cut around with a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to snip into our seams to get a really good turn, and we're going to go ahead and proceed with hoop 4. So our trunk fabric, we're leaving the excess this way. There is really a lot of excess, so we don't really quite need as large of pieces as we have, but when you're new and learning, it's easier to have more room than you need so that you have some wiggle room to work with. So you really want to make sure that you clip perpendicularly into your seam fabric, but not cutting into your stitches, but it will just release that fabric so you get a good turn on your trunk. So you're going to open up your trunk fabric, and again, you can use hemostats or dowel or your finger. Dowel is usually my tool of choice. I just pop that in there to get that trunk stuck out, and then we have our 3D trunk. So in choosing your head option, which is hoop 4, there is a hoop 4A and hoop 4B. I had asked in the fan group to ask what people preferred, and it seemed to be a good split, so I thought it would be worth it to offer both options. So hoop 4A will do all of your left side of your face, do the smile, and then do all of the right side face. All of the steps are shown in what order in the tutorial. That is so when you have your trunk fabric, you're going to have to be flipping this 3D trunk out of the way. So hoop A will be leaving the trunk on this side so we can do all this detail, then smushing it upwards, doing the smile, and then smushing it this way to do your right side. There's more thread changes, even though there's less steps because there's a lot of moving markers in the way that I'm going to do it. But I have chosen to do B, which is my preference. So it's going to stitch the white on this side of the eye, moving marker, so I can adjust my trunk and stitch on the other side because I hate changing colors. So if you have a multi-needle, I'm sure you would like the A option, but for me, I'm trying to change the colors as little as possible for me. So for the hoop 4, regardless of your choice of A or B, you are going to stitch the first step on your stabilizer. Okay, so step 1 is stitched on our stabilizer. It gives you center markers so that you can line your trunk up properly. So the big thing with the trunk is you want that center seam right along the center markers. And the other thing to note is where that seam stops stitching, you want that right on top of where that center marker meets the placement outline. If not, your trunk could potentially be too low for the smile that goes underneath. So that's the only thing you really have to watch out for when laying your trunk. So center seam matched up with your center markers, and the bottom of the seam right at the intersect of the center markers and the placement line. So the tack down is stitched in 2 steps so that you can keep your trunk out of the way. It doesn't really get in the way, so if you want to have it straight up, you can a lot for this, but it is designed so that you can be safe and have it pushed one way or the other. So I have my trunk flipped to the left. I think I had it accidentally flipped to the right when it started. I had to flip it back. So it's going to just stitch this half, so you can then flip your trunk back over, and it's going to tack down the rest of the head. So our trunk fabric is tacked down with our trunk in the middle. It's able to swing either way. So again, I'm doing 4B, but 4A would stitch all of the items here, the smile, and then flip this over and stitch through all of your colors here. I'm going to be flipping back and forth between. You're gonna want water soluble stabilizer for this step, but it's going to have to be cut in 2. So I'm going to cut mine in half and pin it on this side, and then also pin it on this side so that my trunk will be able to flip back and forth, and I'll have to use a scrap for underneath on the smile. So I've just pinned just outside of the placement and tack down lines to make sure that my needle doesn't hit any pins. The other thing on faces with large eyes like this one, you need more stabilization. So a single layer of tearaway is probably not going to be enough. So I'm going to slide this extra layer of tearaway, which is just a scrap I pulled off of another project. I'm sure we have lots of those floating around. And I'm going to slide it underneath so that way I have some extra support for those nice large eyes. So the left side of the eye has stitched, and then it has a moving marker up here. Again, you do not have to stitch those moving markers. They're just placed there so it doesn't drag across the hoop to the next step. So while this hoop 4B seems like it has a lot more color changes because there's more step numbers, there's a lot of moving markers which you do not have to change your thread for. They're just stops that are programmed into the design. So then I'm going to go ahead and flop this over to the other side and smooth out my water soluble. And again, you can just stitch the step 5 marker, or I prefer to just move on. Just make sure it doesn't get caught under your little flap of water soluble. So you could tape that down, I suppose. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the white on this side. We'll stay on this side for the next step color. Every time you have a moving marker, that's just an indication that you need to flip your trunk from one side to the other. When it does do the black, the mouth is included. So you're going to be pushing your trunk upward for the mouth. And I'm going to put a piece of scrap soluble stabilizer over that when I do that step, just to make sure on my fur that the smile is nice and visible. So I've come to step 10. I've done both of the white and the eye color on both sides. Step 10 is an optional eyelash. So if you do not want eyelashes, you can skip through 10, 11, and 12. But keep in mind that if you skip right to step 13, it's going to go right across each of your color stops. So you're going to want to click through, so to your moving marker, and flip over to 11 and then 13. So 13 is going to be the black of your eye that you're going to want to stitch whether you do eyelashes or not. So I am going to do eyelashes, so I'm going to go back up to step 10 and stitch that. So I've gotten to the point that I am stitching my smile. It has a moving marker that comes down, so that's how you'll know it's different, because the other ones go upward. So I'm just going to go ahead and just watch that seam there. I'm actually going to lay just a scrap piece over top so nothing catches on that gap of water soluble. So you go ahead to step 17. And I'm going to make sure that my trunk is smushed up forward a bit to the back of the hoop for this step. Always find my own little mistakes when I stitch things. So the smile actually stitched from this direction to this direction, but it should go from this direction to this direction. So I will fix that for the final file for you guys. So we're coming here, and then it's going to moving marker down here, and then it's coming back up to this side to stitch the under eye detail for this side. Okay, so we've completed the face details, flipping it back and forth. Again, you can choose your preference as to which you prefer. I'm just going to stick my trunk up for now, and we have to do our placements and tack downs for our ears. On the hoop A, where we're trying to move the trunk as little as possible, we do an ear and tack it down on one side, and then an ear and tack it down on the other side. For this one with the least amount of color changes and mostly the same as our normal stitching, we're going to do a placement, moving marker, placement, tack down, moving marker, tack down. So we've got our two placements stitched on the side. Whether you do it one way or the other way, you will eventually have your placements on either side. So if you're unsure on the 3D, you can lay your limbs how you want them to look, and then you flip them over like the placement line was a mirror, and you're going to tack them down. So when you're tacking down limbs, you want to make sure that you really watch them, and if you want them to be very even, I always start them right underneath my needle foot. So you don't want the foot or the item right in front of your needle foot. And if you want your ears a little bit lower, I would just manually push through a few stitches, but I always put it right underneath my needle foot so the needle foot doesn't come down and push it down. And you're also going to want to really watch this step. You don't want to get all the way to the end of your project and have your ear rip the rest of your project out. So this one is going to tack down, and then it has a running line up to the top, so that way you're not crossing over the ear to get to the next ear. So you can tape or pin those in place. I'm a hold them out of the way of the needle kind of girl, and I'm ready pretty much the whole time with my finger on the stop button to make sure in case anything catches up or does something that I don't want it to do. So I've got both of my ears tacked down, face down. That's what they look like when they're open. My little 3D hoop. So we're all done of that detail. So we just have to add our backing to our face. And as you can remember, we added our backing fabric to our body. So I've gone ahead and cut out my body, and I have vertical slit as much as I can on all of those curves. And what you're going to do is you're going to take, you've ripped the stabilizer out of that hole that we cut out, and you're going to pull that backing fabric outside of your body. So your body is still inside out, but we've pulled our backing fabric through that hole. So now we're going to be adding this backing fabric to the hoop now. So we have a short side and a long side. So we're going to be tucking those ears back in. And so you have the wider hind legs and the shorter front legs and the shorter fabric. So you're going to be using just that fabric as your final outline. So you want to center that as best as you can. And I personally prefer getting as close to that hole as possible. There isn't a lot of wiggle room there anyways. So you're going to lay that fabric down centered, flip your legs out of the way, and we're going to be flipping your body out of the way this way. We're going to be doing just this side. So you don't want to be stitching on any of this fabric. You just want to be stitching on the backing fabric that you've pulled through. So having that pushed forward, and then I stitched a little bit here, and then I just took a stop so that I can push all of my fabric to this side just to make it easier for myself, but you can do as you prefer. So there are 2 moving markers here as well. So again, you can stitch them or not. So there's one here, and then it's going to pull down to this area, and then back towards the center. So we want to make sure we have that bulk fabric out of the way. So we're stitching from the bottom center up the other direction. So we're going to push all of this fabric out of the way, smooth our ear out of the way, and stitch around to the top again. So it's gone ahead and stitched from here around to the center. There's a stop star there so it doesn't come into all that bulk. There is quite a bit of bulk with the ears and the trunk, so towards the end I stopped a few times just to smooth out my fabric, and as you can see there is a little bit of gathering there, and that's okay. It won't show when you turn around, especially if you're using fur, which causes your bulk issues a lot of the time. So we've got our inside out body attached to our head, and we're going to take this out of the hoop, zoom out a bit, and we're just going to trim around our head with a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to notch into our seams to get a nice round turn on our head. So I've gone ahead and cut around my head all the way around with a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch seam allowance and removed any excess tearaway that I didn't want. You want to notch into your seams, especially around the ears, to get a good turn. Okay, so then the next step is we're going to just shove that head inside that hole that we have created to get that on the inside for turning, and then we have our turning hole in our leg. So we're going to go ahead and shove that all out. And again, my preferred tool of choice is a dowel to make sure everything gets all poked out. Just want anything blunt, sort of really poke out all those little bits. And then we've got our face there. So all we have left now is to stuff this guy. So I would suggest stuffing the head first. So we've got our turning hole here. So I would suggest stuffing into the trunk first, then the head, and then work down to the body. My favorite tool for getting inside these is to take a little bit of stuffing in your tweezers and shove that up into the trunk to get a nice firm stuff of your trunk. So I've gone ahead and stuffed his trunk and his head, or hers, I guess, and then stuffed the body. So all we have left is just to turn the small turning hole. So my tips for turning is you want to find that initial closing, sorry. So you want to find that initial placement and fold just inside of that, and then match your bottom so you get a nice symmetrical close. So I'm going to go from the inside out. Hard to do to keep it in camera. Okay, so I have my knot on the inside, and what you're going to do is you're going to go straight across from where you are in and go inside your stuffy and come out in the front. So if you see here, I'm going to go straight across to the next side, and you can see the raw edge there. So I'm just going to, it's hard to see with the fur, pull through and pull it in. So in from the outside, come out, and I do a nice basting stitch that's really wide to start, and then I'll go back through and do a second round to make it more close together, but I just find it's easier to get that to go through. So they call it a ladder stitch because it makes little ladder rungs. So you're doing the side of the ladder and the stitch goes across. Side of the ladder and the stitch goes across, and you can pull as you go. So we finish closing that up and tie that off, and then your stuffy will be complete. So once we've closed up our stuffy, we're all finished. So you can see the ears are nice and stable with just that single layer of felt so that they stick up and don't flop down. If you want floppy ears, you can just leave that part out. So there she is from the side and the back with her cute little yarn tail. The other side and the front. So we hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have any questions, please feel free to comment or reach out. We have a Facebook page as well as a Facebook fan group, which is a great community of stitchers that are always willing to lend a hand and help you out with any questions that you had. We'd love to know what other animals you'd like to see in this series, and we're looking forward to seeing more of them.